Welcome to episode 106 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Principal Kafele about 3 beliefs that damage teacher relationships with Black male students and how to connect instead. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the summary, links to recommended resources, and to share your thoughts on the show. So the majority of my podcast episodes are on topics that will help you improve your teaching practices with all of your students. But in some cases, I like to talk about specific student populations. It's okay to focus for one episode on meeting the needs of English language learners or students with special needs. And it's okay to focus for an episode on students of color. In this case, I chose to focus even more specifically than that and to talk about Black males in particular. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that my guest today is a Black male himself. He speaks from that perspective, and he's a nationally renowned authority on his work with Black male students. Principal Kafele has been a middle and high school principal and led transformation of 4 different urban New Jersey schools, including Newark Tech, which went from being a low-performing school in need of improvement to being recognized 3 times by U.S. News & World Report magazine as being one of America's best high schools. He's written a number of books, including the bestsellers Closing the Attitude Gap and Motivating Black Males to Achieve in School and in Life. Principal Kafele has a special heart and passion for helping Black boys and young Black men excel. And I didn't want to water the subject matter down by trying to go too broad, though I'm certainly planning to focus on subsets of other students in future episodes. Another reason that I wanted to talk about Black male students in particular is because they are facing unique challenges. There's a tremendous amount of research showing that many Black males in the United States are underserved by our schools. They're 4 times more likely to be expelled than white boys are. And the graduation gap is widening, with only around 59% of Black males graduating from high school compared to 65% of Latino males and 80% of white males. So we do a disservice to our students if we pretend that the outcomes that they experience from our school system are the same regardless of race. Our Black male students can do better, and we can do better by them. That question of how can we do better by them, is what we're going to tackle today with Principal Kafele. I know that every person listening to this podcast who has Black male students in his or her classroom wants to see those students succeed. And we know that the key to helping students succeed is connecting with them and understanding them, building relationships with them so that we can meet their needs better. And sometimes that can be challenging because as white teachers, remember more than 80% of teachers in the U.S. are white, we may have beliefs that can hold us back from really connecting with our Black male students. We want to help motivate them, but we just may not know how to do it. So Principal Kafele is going to outline what he sees as being key for schools to do to support young Black men. As you listen, I want you to think about the heart of what Principal Kafele is trying to communicate, which is that we need to be willing to self-reflect as educators and have difficult conversations sometimes about these kinds of sensitive topics. It takes courage to be willing to self-examine. And quite honestly, I'm proud of you for showing up to this conversation today and being willing to not only listen, but to think about what you'll hear and think about the implications for your teaching practice. Being a culturally responsive teacher is a journey that we are all working toward. As white educators, we all, myself included, have implicit bias. We have biases that we aren't aware of that affect how we think and perceive and treat our Black students. These are blind spots. We just don't know what we don't know, right? So the way to learn is by listening and taking part in the conversations and educating ourselves. And more than anything, the way to learn is being willing to self-examine and not try to deflect or wriggle out of conversations that get uncomfortable. Growth comes from discomfort. So it's okay to hear yourself in Principal Kafele's words and realize that you might not have done all you could do to support Black male students in the past. There's no shame in that unless you refuse to learn and grow. When you know better, you do better. So let's listen and hear together, and let's learn together from Principal Kafele. So one of the beliefs that a lot of teachers have that I think can damage their relationships with Black male students is that they feel like they don't see color. And so they think that their Black male students have the same needs and the same challenges as the rest of their students. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, this has been a problem for me for many years. I've heard that mentioned over the 30 years that I've been in education. I don't see color, I see children, or I see students. And it has bothered me. I've addressed it to the extent that I created a YouTube video to address it, to just reach a broader audience to talk about it. And my conclusion is, here's the teacher who says that, and it's noble. It's on the surface, it's a very good thing. It's a noble thing to be able to see your children as students and not seeing color. But here's the problem: by not seeing color or race or ethnicity, what one does to the student is essentially sets the student up for failure in society. Because although in that classroom teacher may not see color, the world will, society will. And as a result of the fact that you're being identified by your race or your ethnicity, then there's certain isms that come into play on the one hand, but there's certain realities that just come into play as well. And one has to know and be able to maneuver through those realities of race and ethnicity. And if one is not prepared for it, then one doesn't know how to deal with it when confronted by it. So I say to the teacher, instead of just seeing students devoid of color, see color and put yourself in position, or see race, ethnicity, and put yourself in position to help that youngster to navigate a world that's going to see color, that's going to see race, that's going to see ethnicity.
Right. So once you get to that reality, then you can start to acknowledge some of the unique challenges that Black male learners face. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's like, theoretically speaking, we say go to school, work hard, and there'll be some great job waiting for you on the other side. And in reality, it doesn't really work that way, because we're dealing with a real world. So as teacher gains a fuller understanding of the reality of what it is to be an African American, whether it be African American male or female, but in this case, an African American male, then one is able to help youngster, first of all, to provide a fuller education, so the youngster has a better understanding of how I'm going to be able to survive, how I'm going to be able to grow and develop in a world that's going to look at me based on who I am, like I look at myself. I've gone through all sorts of experiences, all sorts of challenges in the education industry and the speaker industry that perhaps a lot of my counterparts don't have to deal with. But had I not had prior knowledge and prior understanding, and a lot of that just through a lot of reading over the years, then I may have quit early. I may have thrown up my hands and tried something different for lack of preparation to deal with the realities of life.
So what should a teacher do instead? If a teacher can acknowledge and sort of affirm a student's identity, what can a teacher do to help address some of these unique challenges that Black male learners face?
One of the things, and I typically look at things holistically and collectively on a macro scale relative to the school, and what can that school do? As opposed to an isolated teacher. See, I look at because these were realities that I face, but I looked at the fact that I got a school full of African American males, and I want to be optimal in terms of my effectiveness. So I began to bring Black males from all genres of life and various different experiences and success levels into the school on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, to talk to my young men about how to navigate their struggles, how to deal with their unique experiences and realities, challenges and obstacles. What are the things that they needed to do that teacher may not have been in position to address just from lack of knowledge and not being an African American male. So in other words, I need the teacher to teach what the teacher teaches, but then I'm bringing in these young men who have a different understanding of life as it relates to being a black male, who can give these young men information and experiences that the teacher just may not be able to provide.
I really like that. I like that idea of looking at this as something that it's not all on one individual teacher's shoulders to try to solve that. This is really should be something addressed at the school level, and that, you know, black male learners need to see role models in school that look like them. You know, I mean, as a white female growing up, almost all of my teachers were white females. And so I constantly saw myself represented in school. And I can't imagine what that would be like for a young black man to go through 12 years of schooling and never see a teacher who looked like him and who understood him in that way.
Yeah, and I know it firsthand because I went through school in that regard, and so did my children. It's just not real. It's not reality, nor a given that we're going to go through the grade levels and have the opportunity of having a teacher that looks like us with a common experience and background. So therefore, and it's not to say that the white teacher cannot be successful and productive, but it is to say that African-American teacher is bringing a dimension into the classroom that the white teacher just may not have because hasn't had that experience. Like, I meet a lot of teachers throughout the country whom their initial exposure to African Americans on a sustained basis is their teaching experience, yes, being in the classroom. So the first time in my life, I'm the teacher, I'm 22, 23 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm interacting with African Americans on a regular basis. And prior to that time, the interaction with African Americans may have been very limited, although the teacher had desired to be in that setting, in an urban setting, in a school that was populated by or in part by African American students. But now there's a learning curve. Mm-hmm. Do I know these kids? Do I know these students beyond stereotypes, beyond generalizations, beyond what the media has portrayed them to be? Mm-hmm. Do I know them as human beings?
That sort of leads us into the second belief that can really damage teacher relationships with black male students. And I think that I think sometimes white teachers and white female teachers in particular feel like, well, my black male students aren't going to really be able to relate to me as a white female. So the best that I can do is to try to connect by just sort of mimicking their slang or trying to incorporate hip hop in instruction. And so we get these surface levels of cultural responsiveness, and without really ever getting into deep culture, because as you mentioned, they don't really have that exposure to a lot of African Americans on a sustained basis. So what would you say about this issue about white teachers believing that their black male students won't relate to them, and so they have to try to bring in the culture that way?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost to that teacher, if there was a teacher listening to this interview and thought that if I could learn their slang and mimic their behaviors and incorporate hip hop music or anything of that nature, I would say refrain, right? Mm-hmm. Just refrain, because all you become then is just a caricature. Mm-hmm. You're not a teacher. You're not quality at what you're doing, because those slangs do not comprise what it is to be black. That's just some subcultural stuff. That's a part of just a small part of who they are. But in terms of a fuller essence of what it is to be black, I certainly wouldn't use a go-to as slang, right? Or the music that they listen to. There's a need, but let's go back to the original question first. Relative to relating to a teacher because she happens to be white female. I can't tell you the number of white female teachers who have come to me in workshops and conferences and have raised that concern. I don't know if they'll be able to relate to me the way they might relate to you, right? Mm-hmm. And I say to them all the time, I say, the hang-ups as they relate to race in terms of relating, not to necessarily confuse it with the previous question, but the hang-ups with race, I always tell teachers, that's an adult hang-up. That's something that we bring, but the youngster is not necessarily bringing that along with him or her, but in this case, him, to the classroom. We tend to have these adult hang-ups because we've been in the world a little bit longer. Youngster on the other hand, wants to see, do you care about me? Do you like me? Do you appreciate me? Do you value me? Am I worthy of your attention? See, so youngster is saying, young man is saying, prove to me that you're in my corner. Prove to me that you're with me for the long haul, despite whatever mistakes I may make along the way or bad decisions. But it has nothing to do with the fact that you're a white woman. Now, but the bottom line, because a black teacher could walk in there and the kid reaches the same conclusion, prove to me and then I'll give you myself. I'll give you my all. So the teacher can't go into a classroom, particularly if the teacher chose to be there, with a mindset that I don't know if these youngsters will relate to me because I'm a white woman. I tell teachers all the time, in fact, I preach it to them. Do not go in with that attitude. Do not go in with that mindset, or you will lose from the very start. From the outset, you're defeated, and thereby youngster will lose out as well, because you're operating at a deficit, right? So instead, see yourself as, yeah, I'm white woman, but so what? I'm here to provide this young man with a world-class education. I will ensure that I get all of the professional development. I will get all the experiences and exposure that I need in order to make the most solid connections with these young men that I can possibly make. So the mindset is, I am committed to being an extraordinary teacher of whatever students are in my classroom. If that means that that I've got to go be up above and beyond what I learned in undergraduate school or even graduate school relative to urban studies and connecting with African American students, then so be it. I will do it because I'm that committed to it.
That's so good, that this talk about, genuine relationships and really showing kids that you're committed to them. And I think the authenticity piece there is really important, because when a white teacher who has had very little exposure to Black culture tries to come in and decides, well, I'm going to try to wrap my lessons, to be relatable to my students, that doesn't feel authentic to the kids. And that's why it backfires.
No,
and I think
not.
They get confused because they see it working for other teachers. Like, well, she does it, he does it. How come it works for them? Oh, it must just be because I'm white, or whatever factor they figure is not, is holding them back. And so this idea of, showing kids that you care about them, you are committed to their success no matter what, and you're committed to getting to know them on a deeper level, not just trying to take the easy way out by using the same vocabulary that they use, but actually get to know them as people, get to know.
That's right.
What they value.
Those relationships, those relationships coupled with compassion for students are so crucial. And, I've got countless examples of teachers who worked for me over the years in my capacity of principal, who were superstars in schools that were 70, 80, 90, and 100% African American. I mean, just extraordinary educators, because they were committed to those kids by way of initially just forming solid bonds with them, forming solid relationships with them, getting to know them beyond the names on their birth certificates, getting to know the fuller essence of those kids, which included getting to know their history and getting to know their culture.
Yes, that's fantastic.
Putting themselves in position to even teach them their history and culture, because, that's a whole other discussion. But youngsters who are coming to school that have no sense of who they are, historically speaking.
Yes. That just leads us right into this next belief that some teachers hold that can damage relationships, which is that the teacher doesn't know much about Black history, him or herself, and doesn't know how to incorporate in the curriculum, and assumes that it doesn't really matter, that as long as we're just teaching about Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, a few people like that in February, we're good, and that doesn't somehow impact the motivation of Black male students. Can you talk about how not seeing themselves represented in the curriculum impacts the motivation of Black male learners?
Yeah, that is that question speaks to the very foundation upon which I stand. It's my core. And let me just give you this quick backdrop. I took over the first school that I led back in 99 up until 02. I went to the superintendent and I said to him, I'm going to make this thing work. I'm first year principal, but I need you to work with me on one thing. I need to ensure that teachers are culturally responsive. So I've got to undo a lot of what my staff know, and I got to reshape them. I got to rebuild them. And I want to infuse African-American history and culture into curriculum as separate courses, but also into math, science, social studies, obviously, English, and all other subject areas. I want to make sure that when children are in a classroom, they see themselves in the lesson. The same way if I were to take a group picture of 10 people and give each of the 10 a photograph of the group, more than likely, each of them will look for themselves in the picture before they look for others. Mm-hmm. So with that youngster, typically in classrooms across America, he's sitting in the classroom saying, where am I? What does this have to do with me after 3 o'clock? But if, on the other hand, I can take that story, that history, and infuse it and make learning relevant, which includes in a math and science class, there's a higher probability that youngster will see himself in the learning, in the lesson, in the curriculum, and thereby embrace it. So as teacher, I have to know more than Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Tubman. I have to immerse myself into their story if I am serious about these kids. If I'm not serious about these kids, then I don't need to be teaching them. But if I made the decision that I want to teach this population of students, or if I'm in a diverse school, I've got a diverse classroom, but there's a portion of those kids, or maybe even one, who's African American, then it becomes incumbent upon me to know the story of those kids so that I can infuse it into the teaching, into the lessons that I teach. So it's a principal like myself, I'm going to ensure that my staff is versed that way, is conversant that way, because it's the foundation upon which I stand. It's saying to young people that your story is you, and it's imperative that you therefore know you. And you're never going to know you in its totality if you don't know the shoulders upon which you stand, the story that precedes you, which is called history.
Mm-hmm. What do you recommend that a white teacher do instead to be a little bit more self-reflective about biases and his or her own limitations? Like how I really like. Let me first say that I really like that analogy that you gave about how when you see a group photo and you know you're in it, you always look for yourself first. And I think that's right. Such a powerful analogy, because I think it's really hard for a lot of white educators, or just white people in general, to understand how important representation is, because we see ourselves represented everywhere. I turn on the television, I see people who look like me. I open magazines, I see people who look like me. I don't question it. And right. I think it's natural. Yes, exactly. And so it's really difficult, I think, to get a lot of people to understand, a lot of white educators to understand how not seeing themselves represented in the classroom affects students of color. And I just think that's such a powerful analogy to think about what happens when you see a picture. You look for yourself. And what if every time you see that photo, you don't see yourself in there? There's no one in that photo that looks like you. So that's right. So and go ahead.
Youngsters saying, where am I?
Yes.
Where am I? And see, the beauty, the best situation is when the leadership understands this, mm-hmm. Whether it be at the district level, but particularly at the school level, where leadership understands the power of cultural responsiveness, cultural appropriateness, cultural sensitivity, and thereby ensures that staff receive the training that they need, but also just the conversations with one another, conversations with leadership, exposure to the different kinds of literature and books and authors and scholars who have already written about this, and just providing them with the information. There's a book that I've been sharing with audiences for the past 31 years called The Miseducation of the Negro. Mm-hmm. And I quote from it often. And it's written in 1933 by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the founder of what was once called Negro History Week, which evolved into Black History Month. And I say that probably 95% of the audiences I speak to, I say to them, you've got to read this book. You've got to understand how and why it is African Americans have been miseducated in classrooms where the intention was to educate them. But in turn, miseducation occurred because in part, they weren't exposed to who they are. And when one is not attached to something, in this case, we're talking about history. If I'm not attached to it, I'm detached from it because I don't know it, then it's like I'm just suspended in midair. But I'm not planted in anything. And there's so many children in schools now, African-American children, in this case, we're talking about black boys, who do not feel that sense of attachment to a foundation, history, and thereby the consequence becomes I'll gravitate to anything that looks like me because I don't know what it is I'm supposed to be gravitating to because I don't know who I am. I don't see beyond my face and my name when I look in the mirror. Whereas that one that's rooted and grounded and planted in a history sees generations just in the mirror, sees historical accomplishment, sees struggle in that mirror, sees responsibility in that mirror, sees obligation in that mirror. See, when I look in my mirror, I see all that, and it keeps me rooted and it keeps me grounded in the work that I do, because I understand I have a role to play. Life is not just play, and try to find all the recreation in my life I can find. Life is about struggle, but that comes to an understanding of self. But that teacher has got to be the one. Because if that's not coming from home, and in a lot of cases, if not most, it won't be. School, classroom has to be in position, I don't care who that teacher is, to ultimately make that youngster proud of what and who he or she is.
So bringing in those role models at the school level, making sure the students see themselves reflected not only in the people in the school building, but also in the curriculum, the conversations, the relationships. Can you speak to a little bit more about the relationship between the teacher and the community? Because I feel like one of the areas where a lot of times white teachers will fall short in this is it can be because the culture is different than maybe what they're used to. They come from a place of judgment and make assumptions and don't realize that they're doing it. Like they're just not aware of these biases. I hear white teachers criticize Black parents all the time for not being involved, not supporting their kids' education. And I think the teachers don't realize that how much that not only them saying those things out loud to other teachers can damage the relationships in the community, but also just that way of thinking, like that translates into the way that you treat students, and it translates into the way you treat their families. They can feel that. If you believe that about them, a parent can sense that in a minute if you believe that parent really isn't doing a good job. And then that just puts the wall up and just creates an even bigger problem there. So can you talk a little bit about the need for empathy and understanding and sort of thinking about your own cultural biases about what a parent's job is, how parents should be acting, how the community should be supporting education?
Absolutely. See that goes back. So much of this takes me back to the macro, the building level. And the need to have those tough, sensitive conversations about unconscious and implicit bias that we bring. But see, at the building level, at the leadership level, leadership has to have the courage. And I use that, and I mean, I put a lot of emphasis on that word. Has to have the courage to engage staff in the tough conversation of addressing the elephant in the room. So in order to be able to have that conversation and to sustain it over a very long period of time, meaning years, one has to be conscious of developing a culture for it. See, as principal, as leader, I can't just walk in there and boom, let me have this highly charged conversation, because there are people in there that are not going to be willing to embrace it, and just the conversation itself can destroy the morale of the building, or diminish it if it's already weakened, right? But on the other hand, one that is cognizant of the need to build a culture in a school of having honest conversations. So we work our way to these conversations. We're sensitive to the different just political differences of staff, and with a full understanding that you've got a spectrum of people in that school. But be that as it may, there's a need to engage staff in that conversation so that we can gain a sense of what those biases are that we bring every day. We think we have no biases, with no prejudice, no anti anything. And then you have this tough conversation with a mirror in front of you, and all of a sudden you find out, wow, I've got systemic biases within me, but there was no mechanism to pull them out, for them to manifest. So, but when you got a leadership that says, I need my staff to engage in this conversation, then now the mechanism is there. Now there's a structure in place that one can look within oneself. Like just for example, you may know, I wrote this book called The Teacher 50, Critical Questions for Inspiring Classroom Excellence. And that book is designed for this conversation. It's a book of 50 reflective questions, which includes a section on cultural responsiveness, to force teacher to look within self. And the beauty is the feedback from the book and the wide usage of just hundreds of schools across the country, teachers looking within self and saying, I need to work on some things. Because the questions are forcing me to go to a place that I have not been as it relates to identifying who I am as it relates to that student. So I may not even be in position to help build their self-identity because of the biases that I'm bringing to the classroom every day.
I love what you said about honest conversations. And I think that is just sort of the core of all of this, like honest conversations with ourselves. What are our own biases? Because we all have them. Like I absolutely have biases that I'm not even aware of. And it's shocking when I discover them. Like, that's just sort of part of the work of self-development. That's part of the work of being a white person in America, where you have the privilege to kind of go through life with these unexamined biases. And you don't have to reflect on how white privilege and white supremacy, affect all these different systems. You don't have to know the history of how Black children were educated in this country. So I think, trying to confront that, especially for the first time, it's a deep work, it's hard work, but this honest conversations that you're saying within the school, honest conversations within yourself, amongst your friends, I think white teachers need to be okay with talking about this kind of stuff. And that's part of the reason why I'm so honored to have you here on the podcast. And I'm so honored to have a platform to be able to have these kind of conversations, because it shouldn't be something that we're scared to talk about or we're embarrassed to talk about. We've got to get honest about what's going on here. And it's for the kids. We can't sweep this under the rug, because the kids, especially our students of color, especially our Black students are suffering because we have these anti-Black biases and prejudices that are sort of woven into the fabric of society, woven into the fabric of our school system. And we need to really get honest about that. And I think once you start making those moves to get honest, I think that comes through in your interactions with students and with parents, because there's a realness there. And there's a sense of really of wanting to understand the kids, wanting to understand culture, wanting to understand the community on a deeper level. And I think that's really powerful. What's one thing that you wish every educator understood about motivating Black males to achieve?
I think that the one thing that really stands out for me is in the word motivate. I say that when we talk about motivating young men, motivating whomever, I say that's a part of it. But motivating is a vehicle, and so I chose to use that word in the title. But then within the book, I go a little bit further and I say, motivating a Black male, that means, okay, I got him hyped. I got him so he wants to do X, Y, and Z. But that's just a vehicle, because ultimately I want that young man empowered. See, so if he's empowered, that means he knows how to turn the corner. That means he knows how to open up a door. He knows how to influence someone else to open it for him. But if he graduates from school, elementary, middle, or high school, or college, motivated, well, he's ready. But if he's not empowered, he doesn't necessarily know what to do with that readiness. So I would say to anybody, in terms of just what I would want anybody to understand about motivating black males, is to make sure that you don't stop at motivating them nor educating them, but make sure that they feel by the time we get to the last day, whether it be the last day of school, last day of being in the school, whatever it is, last day of a marking period, that he feels empowered to take his game to another level. Mm-hmm. Empowerment is key.
Mm-hmm. And the power is something that he already has inside him, right? It's not something, I don't hold the power that I am generously sharing with him. You know, that's not what we mean by empower here, right? We're bringing it out of students. That power is already there. We're just helping them.
It's the same as education. We talk about the word educe, to bring out. Mm. So we're bringing it out of him. It's in him, mm-hmm. but he's got to know how to tap into it, mm-hmm. how to tap into his willingness to soar.
Mm. This is such great stuff, and you've mentioned a lot of really good resources that I'm going to make sure I link to in the show notes and also the blog post for this.
Appreciate that.
If teachers want to get more advice and more strategies from you, what's the best place to learn more and to see what's new that you're working on?
Yeah, my life is on my website, Principal Kafele, KAFELE.com, principalkafele.com. I have got over 500 videos on YouTube for teachers, for principals, for aspiring principals, assistant principals, all categories of educators, for young men. Message to Your Son is a series I created of 210 videos for the boys. I've got videos for parents. I've got speeches and interviews, in addition to the selfie stuff where I'm just talking directly, me to that teacher, face to face. So I've got a lot there, and I'm still adding. I'm always uploading new videos. So
you are. I love your yes. I love your videos. I love the ones where you're just talking right to the camera, and you address so many important leadership topics. There's a lot about empowering black males, but tons of other things too, about how to create change at the school level, and how to have these honest conversations.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's good stuff. Thanks so much for being here and for talking with me.
Thank you.
Your takeaway truth for the week ahead is from Maya Angelou, who said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." So rather than denying or brushing off some mistakes that you may have made with black male students or any student in your past, I encourage you to self-reflect. Know that you did the best you could with what you knew back then. But now that you know better, you can do better. Learn from the experience. Dig deeper into the wealth of resources online that will help you connect with your students and understand them more fully so that you can educate them more fully. Make the choice to keep pressing forward on this journey of being a culturally responsive educator. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Truth for Teachers is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more great podcast recommendations, go to edupodcastnetwork.com. That's edupodcastnetwork.com.